We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal.
The fight for women's rights to vote is one of the most underappreciated civil rights movements of U.S. history. A 72-year-long struggle using methods of nonviolent protests that predated some of the more well-known methods of the 20th century.
I am George Francis Train. I supported Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony by providing my services as a speaker and by developing, launching, and funding their women's rights newspaper, The Revolution, for which I also wrote articles. Elizabeth is widely credited as one of the founding geniuses of the women's rights movement. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Stanton was able to obtain the finest education then available to women by attending Johnstown Academy. She used her insightfulness and eloquence to advocate for many important issues. In addition to being one of the first women's rights activists, she was also a dedicated abolitionist and advocated in favor of temperance. A visit to her cousin, abolitionist Gerrit Smith in New York, helped foster her strong anti-slavery sentiments. She was born in 1815 in New York and died in 1902, 18 years before women won the right to vote.
You want?
I look back at my life and I ponder. I grew up in an affluent family, the middle child, 7 of 11, but only 5 of us lived to full adulthood. My father was a lawyer. My mother was, well, my mother. I think my most influential moment in life came when I was 10. We had just lost my oldest brother, the last of the boys, and my father was inconsolable. I climbed upon his lap and I tried to make him smile, and he looked at me with his sorrowful eyes and said, "I wish you had been a boy." Well, I decided right then I was going to try to do my best, and I told him so. And I did try. I thought the chief thing to be done in order to be equal to my brother was to be learned and courageous. So I decided to study Greek and learn to manage a horse. As I struggled to gain my father's admiration, I studied hard in school. And I also learned to ride fast horses. And I debated the young lawyers who visited our home. And I spoke my truth. I guess if I had to pick a philosophy, it would focus around truth. I believe that the moment we begin to fear the opinions of others and hesitate to tell the truth that is in us, that the divine floods of light and life no longer would flow into our souls. Not speaking truth cheats humanity and checks our own development. I came to understand the differences in the roles of men and women. Women were not allowed to own property, or vote, or speak publicly, and they weren't treated with the same respect. They didn't have the same opportunities as men. This understanding of our differences went straight to my heart. In 1840, I married Henry Stanton. He was an abolitionist, against my father's objections. I had the word obey omitted out of my marriage ceremony. I obstinately refused to obey one with whom I was supposed to be entering a partnership that was equal. We journeyed to England on our honeymoon, and we went to the World's Anti-Slavery Convention as delegates. There, I met Lucretia Mott. She also was sent as a delegate. But the male delegates refused to seat us. They didn't allow us to participate because we were women. I was appalled. I heard later Lucretia spoke at a Unitarian church, and she spoke about the equality for women. It was the first time I had ever heard a woman speak publicly. Wow, she gave a sermon about the rights that we had, the same rights as men. I was filled with awe and felt a newborn sense of dignity and freedom. I had found my calling. I organized the first convention at Seneca Falls, New York, to discuss the equal rights of women. I authored the convention's Declaration of Rights and Sentiments, which was modeled after the U.S. Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. My friend Amelia Bloomer, she introduced me to Susan B. Anthony. There's a statue of us at Seneca Falls, the three of us, commemorating that meeting. If you look at it, you'll also see I was wearing bloomers. Susan was destined to become my best friend, my confidant, my sister in reform for the next 50 years. As I became tied down at home with babies and motherhood, Susan forged ahead in the battle for equality. She convinced me to write the speeches, since writing flowed from me easily. Thunderbolts, she used to call them. She'd travel all over and deliver them. My whole soul was wrapped up in the work of women's equality, but my hands belonged to my family. I testified on married women's rights to the Judiciary Committee of the New York Legislature. I demanded the vote for all women to the American Anti-Slavery Society, and I defended divorce to the National Women's Rights Convention. Those were three issues very close to my heart. After the Civil War, I vowed to fight on. I did not sacrifice my stand on marriage or divorce or on working women. I did not compromise. I demanded every right as a human being. The insistence by abolitionists and Republicans that the black male suffrage was more important than the female suffrage enraged me. I did not support the 14th Amendment. I worked on the completion of the history of women's suffrage with Susan's help, and I wrote for the Lily and other newspapers, and I wrote The Solitude of Self, a demand for women's absolute self-reliance. And then 2 weeks after my 80th birthday, I published The Women's Bible, explaining my position about how the Bible reflects the bias of its male authors against women. I have often said that the Bible and the church have been the greatest stumbling blocks for getting women's emancipation. It's now 1902, and I am tired. It seems my body has given in to aches and pains, and it's very difficult to move. My mind is still sharp, and I keep up with what's happening, what interests me. I'm sad to say that I don't think I will live long enough to see the women get their vote. But my faith is that it will happen eventually.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton fought for her right to vote, so honor her courage and exercise your right to vote regardless of your gender. Please make sure to view the stories of all 3 women we are presenting in this series.
Some fine morning we'll all awake to find the stand that the women will take. They'll change this world all upside down. We'll have a lady mayor in every town.